Welcome to Brain Strength. This is a series where this average fool teaches you a thing or two about sports psychology so that you can be the best version of you. I'm your host, RJ Lynch, with my master's in sports and exercise psychology. Let's get this thing rolling. In this episode of Brain Strength, I'm going to be focusing on a topic that comes up a lot in my sports videos or just things I do with clients, and that's the idea of perfection. Perfection is something that a lot of people strive for both in sport, out of sport. It's something that holds a lot of people back from actually being their best versions. This striving to be perfect is something that people think is the ideal, but in fact, it's something a lot more harmful, and it's something that actually holds us back and weighs us down in the long run. So without further ado, let's get things started. Starting off with some of the falsehoods and the truth behind perfection and what we think about it. So the first thing, as I mentioned, there's a lot of people when they talk about perfection, trying to be perfect, trying to do things perfect, they're thinking that it is striving to be your best. That, well, perfect is ideal, right? So if I am perfect, that means I must be my best. But that's not always true. And part of the reason it's not true is because we can shift our definition of perfect to either fit our needs or to shield us in the case of failure. One of the best examples of this can be a sport like gymnastics or a judge sport. And we can get to a certain point with a certain routine, or especially early on, where it's like, oh, I am perfect at this routine. I mastered this. I am great at this. So because we're so perfect there, we start to focus on it's like, well, that's perfect. That's my best. Why would I go try something that I'm not the best at? And we use that piece to be like, well, it's perfect, so I'm at my best. I couldn't perfect something more.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
And we hide behind that. We use it as an excuse. And then to go along with that, perfection is not self-improvement. A lot of times it's trying to earn the approval and the acceptance of others. So when we think of doing things perfect, rarely is it ever by our own definition. Our idea of a perfect lift is very rarely what we visualize as a perfect lift. It's what a coach might say is perfect. We're trying to gain their approval or their acceptance. Even if they're not trying to get that out of us, we internalize that they want us to be perfect. So we try to be perfect to please them, to make them feel better, to make them like us more, whatever it is. And then lastly, with perfection, one of the things we have to understand that self-improvement, being our best, is being focused on ourselves. When we're trying to do the best that we can, when we're trying to reach our heights, it's things that focus on us. We're looking at our goals. We're looking at the things that we think we need to improve on. When we're trying to be perfect, yeah, some of the things we might focus on are internal, but a lot of it's what our coaches say to us. It's what our friends say to us. It's these expectations that maybe we place ourselves because of what society thinks needs to happen. That to have this perfect lift, this perfect run, this perfect routine, we have to look like this because this is what the professionals do. But the fact is, because professionals are the way they are, their idea of best is different than us. So if we're trying to model them and be perfect just like them, even though they might be far from perfect by traditional standards, we start focusing on that instead of what is right for us. To go along with that, you have to understand that perfection is harmful. It becomes an addiction. Perfection is a belief system that just haunts us. We have these moments of joy of, ooh, I got approval from others that says that was a perfect routine. Like, yes, I'm so happy right now. Yeah, woo, woo. But then that high is followed by a quick crash of, now they're going to expect me to do it perfect every time. I have to do it right again. Oh my God, I have to keep doing it just like that every time. So we start putting the pressure on ourselves. And then when we don't hit it, we get this punishment that we put on ourselves. It's like, I didn't do it perfect. Why am I stupid and dumb? I did it right last time. Why am I like this? And this addiction just starts gnawing away at our brain of like, I have to be like that. I have to gain the approval of others. I have to do it right every time so I can feel that high. I can feel that love that they gave me. And it just crashes us down. Because in truthfulness, there is no such thing as perfection. Perfection is always going to be unattainable because we are imperfect beings. Because as humans, we can never do things perfect all the time. Rarely can we even do them once because perfect is going to look different for everybody else. When you look at a weightlifter, there is the quote unquote biomechanical perfect technique for someone. But because your femurs are going to be slightly longer or shorter than somebody else, that you're going to be different than the average, that your shoulders, that your feet, the way you produce power are going to be slightly different than the average. Your perfect is not the same as the biomechanical perfect. So even if you do things that are perfect and right for you, it is not going to look perfect to others. So it becomes unattainable just through that. And then, like I said, it's harmful because it can create this false shield. Because when we look at something and we look at why are we sucked at our performance, we can say like, well, I wasn't perfect here, that's why I sucked. And then because perfect's unattainable, we always have this excuse that, well, I can't win because I'm not perfect. You can't achieve perfection. So you're saying you can never win? And if you keep saying the reason I didn't do something is because I'm not perfect, you're taking your own responsibility away of like, well, you can still improve. You can still focus on being better, right? Yeah, but if I'm not perfect, well, that's why I can't win. It's always this excuse. It's always this something that says like, because I'm not this, I can't get there. And you always have that excuse because we know once again, perfection is unattainable. Or it becomes this excuse, going back to my example earlier, that I am close to perfect at this routine. I'm close to perfect at this thing. So now I have an excuse to not try any harder, to not try something new. Why would I adjust my shooting technique? Because I'm perfect with it how it is. Well, what if you could get a little bit better if you try this? Well, I don't want to do that because I'm perfect here. I know exactly how things are going to go here. Why would I adjust my running technique, my starts? I'm pretty good at them right now. I think they're perfect. Like, why would I adjust perfection? And then it becomes this block of, well, why would I adjust perfection? Even though if you adjust it here, maybe you are a little bit better. It might not feel as perfect, not as refined, but it turns out it's a better performance for you. So it's always this false shield, this excuse that we get to lie back on that keeps us from actually going for self-improvement. So now that we've looked at what's so harmful about perfection, where it hurts, let's look at why it happens. What are the things that go into it? And it usually comes from sports that are judged. If you're a sport that's automatically looking for the approval of others, you're going to be trying to be more perfect because that's what they want out of you. To get a perfect score in a dive or get a perfect score in a gymnastics routine, well, you have to gain the approval of others and you have to do it exactly as it's written by a book or by demonstrations. And when you have that already built into your sport, you're going to be searching for perfection elsewise because one of the things I forgot to mention about perfection's harmfulness is that it kind of bleeds into other things. Because of the addiction, because of the belief system behind it, it doesn't just stay in sport. Or rarely, to be quite honest, it doesn't stay in the other parts of our life that bleed into sport. So we're someone in a judge sport, we're an ice skater, and we think we have to have a perfect routine. Well, then that starts to bleed into I have to have perfect practices. I have to have perfect this. I have to do perfect film study. And then it slowly starts to bleed out of sport into, well, I have to have the perfect weight because I have to fit into my leotard just right so that don't pay attention to that, but pay attention to how I move my body. Oh, and I have to be perfect here and here and here. And it starts to bleed into everything and take over. Then we see it when our parents are over-involved, when we have over-involved support systems. When you have a parent that's recording every game you have, and then during the whole car ride and the whole night back at home are going over every little mistake you make. When those are supposed to be the people that love you unconditionally, the child, the person starts to gain things in their brain, the pathways that say, well, if I want to get the love of my parent, if I want them to actually just appreciate me at night instead of tearing apart everything I do, well, I have to be perfect in my game. I have to do things right. So as we try to gain the approval of these people that should just love us unconditionally, we start to search for perfection because if we do things right, they can't pull anything apart, right? But once again, because it's unattainable, they're always going to find mistakes. Next thing we see is in technique-heavy sports. So when we have things that are so important, the technique has to be exact. We're going to start focusing in on that. Especially if you're an athlete or if I have athletes that are not the most talented or naturally gifted at something, they're going to try to latch on to whoever they can improve. So if you've got a sprinter and they know they're not the fastest because naturally they just don't have that oomphta that some people do. Well, they're going to look at every little technique thing they can do. It's like, well, if I really work on my running form, if I have perfect running form, if I have perfect blocks, maybe I can scratch out the extra tenth or hundredth of a second I need to make state, to be the varsity athlete. I'm going to focus on this and I'm going to make this so perfect. And then what happens is they get into their sport, they get into the blocks, and then they start to overthink. They start to get, they're like, all right, I've got to do this perfect, I got to do this perfect. And then it's on your marks, set, all right, I do this perfect, and bang, and they're slow out of the blocks because they're still thinking about doing everything perfectly, and then they still suck. And then finally, we see it when we're perfectionists or when our coaches are perfectionists. If your coach is constantly on you about doing everything perfect, you are going to start to ingrain that you have to do everything perfect. One of the biggest lessons I learned from some of my past mentors as strength coaches is when I watch kids do things, when I watch athletes do new movements, I don't sit there and try to coach every little detail. A lot of times I will just kind of let them experiment. Yeah, if they're doing something that I'm afraid is going to get them to tear something, hurt their back, destroy them, I'm going to say something and try to correct it. But if it's something that I look at as like, well, it's not harmful for them, it's not the quote unquote best form, but it seems to be working for them, I'm going to let them kind of work with it a little bit. I'm going to watch them. And if I see that whatever they're doing is creating a weakness later on, then I'm going to correct it. I'm going to make the adjustment there. But if I'm on them for every little detail the first time they ever try a movement, they're once again going to be in their head too much. Especially when I have a power clean or a snatch for athletes that aren't Olympic weightlifters, I get in the spot of they don't need to have Olympic weightlifting form when they do a power clean. They have to have good enough form where they're getting the proper adaptation while not hurting themselves. And that's what I look for. But with all that said, and knowing that it can create problems for us, how do we start beating perfect? How do we start thinking about other things? And the first cure to perfectionism is self-compassion. Now, self-compassion has three aspects to it. Self-kindness, the ability to say, you're okay, you're still loved, you're appreciated, you're enough. There's common humanity, the understanding that all of us go through similar things. You are not alone in the world in whatever struggle you're probably dealing with. And then mindfulness, being present in the moment, being where your feet are and not in the future, not in the past. So how does this help with perfectionism? Well, when we're kind to ourselves, we look at a mistake that we make and say like, it was a mistake. You're human. You're going to learn from this and it's okay. Whereas perfectionism is like, why are you a stupid little pig? Why did you make a mistake? One is very good self-talk that keeps us motivated. The other demotivates us, harms our confidence. Common humanity. Common humanity is the piece, as I said, that says you are not alone. You're not the only one that is struggling to learn something in your sport. You're not the only person that struggles with this technique. Whereas perfectionism is usually along the lines of, why are you the only person that can't get this? Then mindfulness. Perfectionism tries to take you in the past of like, well, you did this perfect back then. Why can't you do it now? Or in the future of, well, you have to be perfect. Otherwise, look at all the people that are going to laugh at you. Whereas mindfulness grounds you in the present moment and says, we are right here, we are right now. We can't worry about what we did in the past. We can't worry about what's going to happen in the future. You just have to give your best, and whatever that is, that's where we are at the current moment. Once we've learned that self-compassion, our next step is embracing fault. We start to learn that there are lessons and strengths in our weaknesses. We start to learn that the only way to improve, to become a master at something, is to fail at many times. We learn that failure is the thing that actually promotes growth. That when we hurt, when we suck, those are the moments where our brain is like, well, I hate this, so let's learn something. Let's do this better. Whereas perfectionism tries to hold us down and just accuse us of having faults, when it says it is not okay to have fault. But in truth, we have to embrace the fact that we are faulty beings, and the way we improve is by sitting there and be like, yep, I'm going to make mistakes, but I will learn from them. And then finally, we learn this very important phrase, this thing that saves us in the moments when it's needed most, and it is good enough. It is saying in our self-talk that, nope, that wasn't perfect, but it's good enough for now. I will learn and practice, I will improve. But I'm good enough right now. It's coming to halftime at a basketball game and knowing like my shooting percentage wasn't great. I had some turnovers, but I played good enough to keep us where we're at. Now I'm going to try to improve a little bit. I'm trying to get to this spot where it's a little bit better, but maybe not perfect. I need to be good enough for the rest of this game for us to win. Will I always be perfect? No. No, I won't be perfect. But I need to be good enough to get us there. Because it's a lot easier to be motivated to do good enough than it is to be perfect when you know one's attainable. And then that translates over to our goals. It's having good enough goals. It's knowing that a perfect game looks like this, but a good enough game looks like this. And good enough goals are goals that are actually built upon our past mistakes. A good enough goal is knowing that in the last game I shot 3 for 7 from the field. Well, a perfect game would be I shot 7 for 7. So what is a good enough goal? A good enough goal is then looking at my next game and being like, can I get 4 or 5 out of 7, or the equivalent percentage of whatever that would be. Then once we hit that, we're like, oh man, that's cool. That's good enough. That's gnarly, right? We look at the next game. You're like, all right, I got 5 out of 7 this last game. This next one, I'm going to see if I can hit 6 of 8. I'm still not perfect, but I'm a little bit better this time. It's a little bit better. The good's a little bit better. And that just helps us get to this idea that I am good enough and I'm improving. Now, if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us, like, subscribe, send us an email through our website. But until next time, if there's anything I said today that you found offensive, I hope you can forgive me. If you say anything in the comments that I find offensive, no, I'll forgive you. Brain strength, out.